Hello, everybody, and welcome to the House of Leaves live show. If you have made it here, I know it's kind of soon. You may not be on yet, but if you are here and you read House of Leaves, if you would just give it a rating in the comments, let me know. Did you rate it 1 star, 5 stars? And if you're here but you didn't read it yet, just leave a house emoji in the comments. Spooky little book nerd. Hey, Ashley, how are you? Hey, Chris. We are here to explain everything, right, Mark?
Yeah, right. Explain? Nuts.
Okay, 3 stars from Chris. Mark and I didn't even talk about our rating yet, so we're gonna surprise each other. So the first part that we'll do, I'm gonna get Mark to talk a little bit about his channel in just a minute. But if you're here and you didn't read it, the first few things that we plan to talk about will not be spoilers, but that time's probably going to go by quickly because it's going to be really hard to talk about this book without giving spoilers. So I'll tell you all, of course, when the spoilers are coming. If you are catching us on the replay, thank you so much for watching. That way you can watch a little bit if you haven't read it yet. Then if you want to read it, you can read it and then come back and catch the replay. So Mark, tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us what you do on your channel, your last 5-star read, and what you have coming up for 2025 and your House of Leaves rating.
Okay. Mark, obviously. I'm 46 years old. I live in North Wales, although you might be able to tell from the accents that I am not originally from Wales. I'm from a little country just across the water called Ireland. I've been on BookTube since I think I joined around about May this year, where I started my channel. And it was originally, the idea was I was going to reread the entirety of Terry Pratchett's Discworld series. And this was just a way of me kind of documenting it, but it's kind of branched out from there a little bit. So I tend to do the normal things that people do on BookTube, the tags, the readathons, the various different, the wrap-ups and the TBRs for the month, and the occasional top 10 in some of the things that I like and dislike as well. So yeah, that's what I do on the channel. The last book I gave a 5-star read to was that was There by Tommy Orange, which was a book I only came across quite recently. Apparently it was nominated for the Booker a couple of years ago, and I think the follow-up to it was nominated for the Booker this year. That's called Wandering Stars. I haven't read that one yet, but it's a book by a Native American author, and it's just from all of these different perspectives, and it's looking at sort of Native American life in the US, but from a very sort of urban perspective. So people who grew up around Oakland, as opposed to out on reservations and things like that. And it was phenomenally good, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. And I gave House of Leaves a very strong 4-star, 4.5, 4 stars. What I went for with it.
Very nice. I gave it 5 stars. I wavered a little bit between 4 and 5, but the more I thought about it, I ended up giving it 5 because of the experience I had with it, and just I can't imagine how somebody constructs that. So hats off to Mark D. Danielewski, and this was also his debut novel, published March 2000 debut novel. And I'll quickly just go over the last 5-star book I had, and then we'll launch into the discussion. So the last 5-star book that I read was American Rapture by C.J. Lead, and I just did an in-depth vlog about it. So if you want to see what I thought about it, you can watch that very lengthy vlog. And speaking of lengthy, I'm going to try, I told Mark, to keep this around an hour, maybe an hour and a half at the most. So I don't keep you all too long, but without anything else, we've got another 5-star here from Ashley, her second time. Yeah, I can see how, like, let me put that comment up. I forgot to put the comments up. Y'all listen. I am not the best at this because I'm still kind of new. This is my first time to be in charge of the live show. I'm usually a guest, so y'all bear with me. 3 stars from Chris, unless we change her mind. Maybe we can. And then Ashley is giving it a 5-star again. Her second time reading it. Ashley said she was only 18 and didn't dive into it as deeply. I can't imagine trying to read this at 18. I think I would have struggled with it for sure.
I tend to agree. I also will say I can understand how giving it a 5-star on a reread, because there's a lot there. There's a lot of depth to it. And when I approached it this time, I very much tried to not fall down all the different rabbit holes that were presented in front of you, and I just tried to just get an overall experience of it rather than going into the full-on pinboards on the wall with red twine connecting things to each other.
I did that, and it was look at this. So this is ridiculous. This is why
that's some annotation.
I can't talk about it all today. It's ridiculous.
Mine's well filmed, but I don't tend to do the annotation side of things. UK cover is different, by the way.
Yeah. This one, I think this is the second edition, but yeah, I like the cover of both of them, really. And let's see, Chris, she took Mark's approach. Yeah, because now I feel like since I took this approach the first time, even though I gave it 5 stars, I'm not sure I would go back and read it again.
See, I think I would. Actually read it. I think it's the sort of thing that would. I don't think I'd do it soon. I think this is something I'll probably revisit in a couple of years.
Yeah. Let's see. Ashley annotated the crap out of hers too. Yeah. I might read it again at some point. But it's still in my head, and I feel like it's going to stay there. So
it does live in your head, doesn't it? It is one of those books that, sometimes you'll read a book and you've loved it and you'll give it sort of the immediate 5 stars, and then a couple of months down the line, it starts to seep away out of the memory. And this is one of the ones that lives there, and it does sit with you for a while, doesn't it?
It does. And let's see, 20 years. Yeah, maybe in another 20 years, that's when I'll read it. Let's see. Hi, Cliff. Thanks for popping on.
Hey, Cliff.
We are happy to see you. We're going to talk a little bit at first without spoilers, and then I will let everybody know when we're going into spoilers. So this was, let's do a quick synopsis. I have like kind of a synopsis, and Mark, if you want to add to that, because it's really hard kind of to put a synopsis to this book, but in like looking at this book, there are 3 layers. You have that core layer, that's the documentary film itself by Will Davidson about the experience of the family in the house that is larger on the inside than it is on the outside. Plus, it keeps shifting and changing dimensions and space and time, it seems like, on the inside. Then you have kind of that middle layer, which is a manuscript written about someone who's kind of trying to critique the documentary and throwing in a lot of academic terminology. This old man named Zappano, who also happens to be blind. And then that outer layer is Johnny Truant, who is this Hollywood tattoo artist, kind of very unreliable narrator. And so he's constantly writing footnotes and responses and things that are going on in his life, but maybe they're not really going on in his life, responding to this manuscript. And we kind of watch this downward spiral. In a few minutes, we'll kind of talk about who might be real and who might not be, but we'll kind of wait for spoilers. So did you want to clarify or help anybody with this?
I think that pretty much sums it up. Yeah, at the core of it, it's actually a fairly simple story. It is just the haunted house. Well, not the haunted house, but this house with these sort of multi-dimensions to it, and the outside size of it not marrying up to the inside size. but it's just how you see that house, because there's a documentary which you never see. What you have is the critique of this documentary, which is done as this sort of pseudo-academic piece by this guy Zampano, which is then found in a trunk after Zampano's dead by this guy Johnny Truant, who then starts to go through it, get obsessed with it, and write his own notes on top of it. And that's why it's complicated, because you've got all those three different layers of stuff that's going on. But as far as what the actual story is, it's relatively simple.
Mm-hmm. And some people don't read all the notes and stuff. I did all of that this time, and I know some people approach it where they read just that core story first, and then they go back and do the manuscript from Zampano and then the responses by Johnny. But I couldn't do it that way. My ADHD I had to know everything at the minute. So I was like kind of breaking it all up and then having to go back. What happened last time in this story? So how did you approach it, Mark?
I kind of flitted between different approaches with it. As soon as I hit a footnote, a reference to a footnote, I would have a look at what that footnote was. Now, if it was just one of the reference books that Zampano had in there, I'd read it and move on. If it was a more in-depth one, like like 5 pages of Johnny Truant and his commentary of what was going on, sometimes, depending on which part of the book we're looking at, sometimes I'd read the Johnny Truant stuff and then come back to it, or sometimes I'd finish off the core narrative in the chapter and then go back and read the Johnny Truant stuff. It kind of depended on what sort of chapter it was, because sometimes the chapters that Zampano has written are explaining the narrative of the film, whereas sometimes the chapter he's written is this sort of pseudo-academic dive into weird stuff. Like he'll start to discuss the scientific nature of echoes and things like that. In which case, the Johnny Truant stuff was a nice break from that, and you could go back to it. But if he's in full flight of the story, I tended to finish the narrative ones and then go back and read whatever Johnny had written as his footnotes.
Yeah, I know there's like all kinds of tips online for how to read it, but I think it's just whatever is working best for you. And like you said, the moment, depending on what it is, you can kind of adjust that.
And it depends on what the footnote is. I mean, like some of the footnotes that he wrote in there. So there's one point he says where the architecture of the house does not match the architecture of any known styles, such as X, Y, and Z. And he lists some architectural styles, or these. And then he lists for about 5 pages as many famous buildings as you can possibly think of.
Yeah.
And in those ones, I kind of like scan them.
That's what I did. I was like, okay, there's nothing really important here. Just a long list of like different architecture styles. Yeah. Which kind of takes us to one of the core concepts of this book is the labyrinth. So kind of looking at that, well, when we think about this labyrinth, questions come up that yes, there's the labyrinth of the house, but is it just physical, psychological, both? And then how does that relate to like personal struggles? So now we're going to get into some spoiler territory, I feel like. So if you haven't read it yet and you don't want to get spoiled, then go back and read it and then come catch the replay. So did you think, as far as the labyrinth goes, that, well, it's kind of hard to like get right in here, but the labyrinth in the house, do you think that it was just in the mind of the characters, or do you think there was a physical changing of the house, that the house itself was a labyrinth? That's kind of a loaded question.
It is a bit of a loaded question because it kind of works off you kind of almost have to think about first is what Zampano wrote about this documentary, is that accurate or not? That's kind of the first thing. If you assume that what he's written is accurate, then there is enough people involved for it not to just be purely psychological. I mean, it'd be easy to look at and think that it was just all coming from Navidson, but there's the rest of Navidson's family, his very young family, and the children reacting badly in the way that they have done. There's the reaction of the others that he brings in, including his brother and all the other people that he brings in for the expedition as well. And they, in that instance, assuming that the documentary is a thing that exists and it's a thing that Zampano is actually describing accurately, then you kind of have to assume that there is some element of it actually happening. Now, the other side to that, and again, you have people who died and went missing in it, and those bodies didn't end up getting recovered. Spoilers. But there is a little bit of an element of it can't be entirely psychological if you assume that what Zampano is saying is accurate.
Yes,
and that was how I interpreted it.
I do too, and I feel like the effects of the house were that whatever you may have been dealing with psychologically, it amplified it. Because when we think about the part where Holloway, who is one of the people exploring, who ends up completely, losing his mind and just panicking and freaking out as he and a couple of his assistants, they are brought in to explore that never, consistent space in the house. And he wants to keep going deeper. His assistants don't. And he just freaks out and ends up shooting them. And, one dies. And he keeps talking to this labyrinth also, referencing to Theseus and the Minotaur, the Greek myth. Yeah. A lot of that was like marked out by Zampano. Yeah. And Truett put it back in there. But, there's constant references in the book to some kind of monster, right? This roaring claw marks. Who or what do you think the monster was?
Now, that I think could very well be psychological, because the one thing about the monster is while you see claw marks, while you see aftermath of, it on the supplies, it never, with the exception of growling, never actually interacts with anyone there. Now, you could argue that the labyrinth itself interacts and has, is, a monstrous presence and does react to what people are doing in a way that, it's making conscious decisions as to what to do to the people based on what's going on in there. But unless if you're considering the labyrinth and the beast as being two separate things, the beast could be very well a psychological impression of what's going on, because that's something that never actually materializes properly.
Right. And it's different for all of them. Johnny hears it at different times. Here's that monster. He opens up the book talking about how he's never not going to be afraid again. So he's warning everybody, really. So entering into the house will affect you psychologically, whether you physically enter the house or you enter into people's interpretation of the house. So I'm going to check these comments real quick. Yeah. That Christine talked about taking it at face value, the story of the house. I feel like if you didn't, you'd be hard pressed to really get through the book.
Yeah, true.
So about Manos and the Labyrinth, yeah.
Interestingly, as Jen pointed out, that was actually all crossed out. And it was something that was even put back into the book, even though it was crossed out, So clearly part of Zampano's narrative, he thought it needed to be left out. Although why he felt the need to keep the echoey stuff in, I don't know.
Yeah. The echo, I was kind of looking at that. I have some notes here. Let me see. I wrote, well, if y'all were looking on my crazy stuff on Instagram and Discord, I was so far down the rabbit hole. I thought somebody was going to have to come get me out.
Sorry, I'm just reading Chris's most recent comment on that.
And yeah, Ashley agrees. No physical monster. Fucking yeah. I remember I thought about you when Mark was talking about the echoes because in our Discord, Christine was like, I think it was Christine. Didn't you say something about the echo and like getting tired of reading that?
I suspect when people DNF that book, I suspect it's that chapter that they tend to drop out on, because it that really does feel like the wall that you have to push through. That's as bad as it gets, and it doesn't get that bad again. And I kind of suspect that it's intended there almost to sort of a little bit brain rot you a little bit, so it's like reading a textbook. But the one thing I did sort of take away from it, there's a part where he puts a formula into it and he describes how if you change this to 0 then the whole thing becomes infinity or some nonsense like that. And it's been like best part of 30 years since I did physics in secondary school, and I'm 90% certain that what he was saying about that was absolute bollocks. His reasoning in there was crap, and from that, when I saw that kind of took my point. That kind of let me sort of think, actually the whole point of this is to kind of show how full of crap Zampano actually is, right, especially when it comes to the academic stuff.
Yeah, because sometimes, I knew he was on the right track with something like if it was literary theory, but anything if he was talking about physics or whatever, I was like, I don't know. I think I can't find what I wrote, but I think I wrote something about the echo. Really the only important thing I kind of took from that was the idea that whenever you hear an echo, you're just getting like the last pieces of something. So you're not really sure what's being said. So I felt like that kind of lent itself to this idea of the unreliable narrators and the questioning of what's real and what's not. We, as the reader, are only getting pieces of Johnny Zampano and Davidson's documentary. So that's kind of what I looked at to see.
There is another one on that as well, which it's in that same vein. It's in the same chapter, and again, this was another reason I kind of took this to mean that he was kind of talking a little bit of crap, where he references all of these other academics and things, and he does a reference, and he has a list of people's names that's about 3 pages long of all of these different people that see these people for more things. Right. And then later on, Johnny actually discusses with the most of his bollocks. Yeah, Johnny actually discusses with the person that Zampano employed to write that down, and she said, yeah, he was making that up, and he was just coming up with names off the top of his head. It was all crap. So yeah, I kind of looked at that whole Echo chapter, which is again, that's a hard one to get through, and I kind of looked at it as the point of, yeah, this is just to show Zampano as being full of crap.
Yep. And to mess with the readers too, I think, just to make us almost as out of our heads as these characters are. So another thing that we really see in this novel too, of course, is reality versus perception. So I mean, when we look at how that objective reality kind of gets blurred with subjective perception, kind of along the lines of some of the things we've talked about already, about what is real, what's happening. And one thing too that Johnny does is, he'll say this happened and this happened and this happened. And then right after that, he goes, none of that actually happened.
Yeah.
So you're left to wonder, what it is, does he think these things happen? Is he just messing with us? And what was the point? Do you have any thoughts about what the point of that was?
Okay. There was I kind of looked at it from 2 points of view, and I didn't really come to a conclusion either way on it. I thought one way of looking at it was Johnny sort of doing wish fulfillment and sort of saying, this is what I would have loved to have happened in the situation. And in some of this, it was, going off and getting cleaned up with his two doctor friends somewhere,
Yeah.
and then the other one was like where he beat the living daylights out of and killed the Polish boyfriend of the girl he'd slept with. And in both of those, there was an element of sort of wish fulfillment. The other side to it, though, as well, was that it showed that Johnny is capable of creating fictions, because if the one, especially with the doctors, he talked about, when he was getting cleaned up, how they then told him this story about this woman who'd lost a child just after it was born, and it was this quite a deep story in this. And I think there was an element of showing in this that Johnny might seem pretty basic, but he is perfectly capable of coming up with elaborate fictions. So therefore, the Zampano stuff could quite easily be Johnny's.
Yeah, that leads into the next question. Do you think that Zampano stuff is Johnny? Do you think that's the same person?
I don't know. I actually, I kind of teeter on this one. Sometimes I look at it and I think that this is entirely the work of Johnny. Sometimes I look at it as this is entirely a fiction that Zampano came up with, and Johnny lost his mind going down the rabbit hole on deconstructing. And then sometimes I look at it and think, the actual house and the Naviton record, they were all things that really happened. And even though all of the evidence afterwards says that they didn't, the influence of the house has somehow changed the perception of reality around it. And I can't come down on one that I say I definitely believe it's one or the other. I don't know about you. Did you come with one an overlying theory of which was real and which wasn't?
I didn't. I would kind of change my mind depending on different parts of what's happening, but I could never really determine whether or not Zampano was real, or if it was all just Johnny. And then I want to give her credit, Carla, on Carla's little library on Instagram. She did the read along. I don't think she's here today, but she may catch the replay. But she sent me this note on a theory that it was Johnny's mother, Pelafina, who wrote the whole thing.
Okay. I can see that.
Yeah, she said a couple of things that kind of lent to that. She said that this, the differing fonts is something we haven't really talked about, but we know Zampano's got one font, Johnny's got a certain font when he writes, and then Johnny's mother, who is in the mental institution, she's written in these letters, but she said that this font is the same, and you probably won't be able to see it if I do it like that. But she talked about how the font that's like by Zampano and the introduction and notes and that little thing, that little note at the beginning, this is not for you, right here.
Yeah.
She said that matches the same font as Johnny's mother's letters. So that she would be writing, this is not for you, the reader, maybe, or even this is not for you, Johnny, because she feels guilt because she actually did kill him. The book talks about how she tried to kill him, and that's why she's in the institution, except for that brief little part where he talks about it being an accident. But I don't, think so. And then she is trying to deal with her own grief and guilt about what happened. So she's constructed all of this. So it's
the only thing I would argue against that one a little bit, the only thing I would sort of push back on that one a little bit on is when the first, and actually to be fair, the only primary account of anything that that is actually from a single person is actually her letters. That's the one thing that has been put in by the editors that say these are actual letters that were written, apart from some of the other sources that are there. But the one thing I would say about her perception and what she wrote, she had Johnny on a little bit of a pedestal, and I'm not certain she would have written him going down into those levels of depravity in just about every sense that was put in there for Johnny. I'm not sure she would have written that story about Johnny.
Yeah. That's what I was thinking, because there's so much with Johnny that we'll talk about in a little while when we kind of talk about some feminist theory and women in this novel. But his sexual escapades, and then I also, in talking to Carla, I was like, but I would have to wonder then too, because you have director, the one who's over the mental institution, he's writing also. So I don't think she would have made all that up, but it's kind of, just another one of those things to think about. Let's see. The mother baby was real. Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting.
Baby was Johnny, and the Johnny parts were actually mom. Yeah. Yeah, right. Why would she? Yeah. So again, like we can't really come down on any one thing. And I think that's
That's
maybe
what's
why some
fun
people
about this
don't
book.
like
That's
this
one of the
book.
things I like about it, is
Yeah.
it doesn't give you easy answers. It doesn't give you any bloody answers, quite frankly.
No.
Which I quite like. I quite like ambiguity. If you don't like ambiguity, this is not the story for you at all.
And I think that's also where that labyrinth concept comes in too. Yes, the book is, the stories are a labyrinth. The text is a labyrinth because you got to turn it all around, and, you got to put it in the mirror. You got to look at it, upside down, all that stuff. And then we are constantly going to keep going around and around in a labyrinth, not really able to understand what any of this means.
I will say one thing. That was one of the things that I found a bit. No, good God, no. I mean, Chris, clearly you haven't seen my channel before, because I never have answers to anything.
I don't think there's any answers to this.
Hey, Nicole.
Hey, Nicole. Yeah, catch the replay. I hope you have a good shopping trip. Yeah, it's one of those books that I don't know. I mean, at the end, if y'all can be thinking, I'm going to ask for any sort of read-alikes or, movies. I have a few ideas that kind of loosely tie in. So it is a unique construction for sure.
It is totally unique. I genuinely not read anything like it before. That's not a compliment, and it's not a criticism of it. It is just factually completely unique in anything I've read. One of the weird things that I would say is that I did go into it, and I did kind of semi assume that the whole bits of type all around the place and having to turn the book on its side and things like that, and look in mirrors and things, I did sort of go into it thinking it was a little bit gimmicky and there wasn't an awful lot of point to it. But it's actually used relatively sparingly, and it's only ever really used once they've gone into the actual labyrinth side of the house itself, and it is always a reflection of what's going on, what they're doing. So if the bit where they punch through the wall, then they show a square on the page that's punched through, where you see in the mirror backwards the stuff that's written on the opposite page. It's things like that. When it's talking about the deep staircase, and some people are at the top and some are at the bottom, it has writing on the top and writing on the bottom depending on where they are. When it talks about ascending a ladder, then it starts to write the letters going up the page. When it starts about the corridor condensing, then it starts to condense the text down into smaller and smaller spaces. So I actually weirdly went into it thinking this is going to be a gimmick and a nuisance, where it actually complemented what was going on in the text very, very well, and I was quite surprised by that.
I agree with you. Yeah, I thought it was just really, brilliantly done, because the way it just made me feel more into the book too, that I was looking at the stuff and I could just visualize everything so much better.
I have to say, I agree with Ashley on that one, where the whole book is about disorienting and confusing. The whole flicking back and forth is all about keeping you really quite in a state of being quite unnerved, nerved, and unbalanced. So when the creepy stuff starts to happen, your brain is kind of primed to accept it in a much more weird way than it normally would.
Yes, because I mean, I would find myself like waking up at night thinking about this book.
Yeah.
No, Christine, you are not
going back to it. No, God, no. I mean, I think Yeah, it kind of makes everyone feel a bit daft and weird and silly and foolish at parts to it. And if you try and explain what you're doing to somebody else, this book without any context, it's like trying to tell someone about a dream that you had. You can sort of see
Yes.
their eyes glazing over, going, "Why the hell are you reading
Yeah.
that?"
Yeah. My poor husband, he was like, huh? When I was like this
Yeah.
and this and this, and he was like, yeah, an interesting mind. Yeah. Definitely he
That's
has
one way of
that.
putting it. Oh, that is
Oh,
actually addressed in the text, Chris.
yeah.
There's a part where he's talking about there's an old thing in old typeface in very
Mhm.
old books where there's where it looks where there's a type of S that looks like it's an
Mhm.
F, that is used in it's kind of like a softer S or something like
Yeah.
that, and it is used in old books and things
Oh,
like that. You do
yeah,
see
the
it.
old English, is that what it is?
Yeah,
Like,
it is.
I think they
You do
didn't
see
used
it
to have
in
that?
old English books sometimes, and you see it on old over in the UK. Sometimes you see it in very old signage and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
that was a thing that was actually used grammatically. And Johnny actually talks about how he saw that and how stupid it looked that sometimes he got F's in there. So it seemed like that was a Johnny reaction, a childish reaction to just right stuff it. If he's going to put F's instead of S's in there, I'm going to put
Yeah.
F's instead of S's in there.
Yeah. Yeah.
I,
I
I
felt
think
that way too. Yeah.
I
He
think
was
I
kinda
think
like,
I
"Look
think
at
Chris,
me."
it was just him being a child. He was
Yeah.
just being a brat and just trying to,
Mhm.
that was all it was.
I think so too. Is there anything else we wanna say about Johnny at this point?
um, he's not the most likable character. I will
No.
give him that.
No. No, he's not. What about Navidson or Naviton? I've heard it said both ways. Naviton himself, the documentary filmmaker who buys a house with his significant other and their children. Um, what did you think about his relationship to his significant other and his children? And how do you think the house started to change that relationship?
I think the house played on his ambition and his vanity. He moved to the house as a means of, stop going off and being this war correspondent around the world and settling down and things like that, and settle down. He did that for his family. And as soon as the opportunity to, plow straight into danger and be the center of attention came up again, he went straight back into it. He didn't he bear, and he actually kind of looked at his family with a little bit of resentment about the fact that they were almost holding him back from it.
Yes. And one of the things too, like I noticed also there was a lot of military terminology in this book.
Yeah, he
Like,
did spot
yeah,
it. Yeah.
one of the things he said was that he wanted to have this house kind of in a secluded area in Virginia. I don't think we mentioned the house on Ash Tree Lane in Virginia, but he said it was an outpost for him and his
Yeah.
family. So even things like that. And then they talk about having, I got some more notes here. There's just so much.
There was a
And
lot of military terms in it, even though I don't think any of the characters had a military background, did they?
no, he was just like that, like you said, the war correspondent.
Yeah.
And that also kind of leads to him, and as far as his, psychological issues like that guilt, because he keeps talking about he's got to go and rescue the people who are lost, because you do get people down in the, labyrinth or that ever expanding room that get lost. And he goes in to get them, and he talks about how he's got to do this even though Karen, his significant other, doesn't want him to, because he keeps talking about how it was too late for him to save Delisle.
Yeah.
And for like a long time, we don't know who Delisle is. And then we get toward the end and find out that when he was taking photos, that he was, I don't remember. Do you remember exactly what area he was in?
It was in Africa somewhere.
Yeah.
I think it might have been Sudan or something like that.
Yeah. And he saw this child who was on the point of death from starving and malnourishment. And he snapped a picture of her, and then she died. So he's dealing with all of that guilt from not being able to save her, which starts to make me wonder what's in his head as far as what's going on in the house.
Yeah, the thing about the Delisle thing though as well is that again is another um that's another bit of almost evidence to show that some of this is made up, because the image that's described is a very real image that was taken
Yeah.
by a photojournalist called Kevin Carter, who did actually kill
Mm-hmm.
himself.
Mm-hmm.
I'd heard about him many, many years ago because the Manic Street Preachers, a band, has a song called Kevin Carter, and I googled who that was and found out he was this photojournalist who'd taken this famous picture, which essentially Navidson is now taking the credit for.
Yeah.
I've got an answer for that, Chris, but that might be something that comes on in a little bit.
You go ahead now if you want to.
Do you want my honest opinion on that one? Is that was a made up story by Johnny, and I think that is all part of a very much bigger theme, which is Johnny's opinion of women. Is my honest answer on that one. So I think that is what that is about. Because
yes, let's launch into the women in this book. Yes.
They're not very well served, are they?
No. I think it was too, because, just the way that he talked about women and everything had to do with him and his experiences, and just, I think I can't remember. Like, I annotated way too much, but I know I had some comments about the way that he did that.
Well, okay, there's kind of two ways of looking at it. There's both Johnny's view of women, and then there's kind of Danielewski's writing of women, which, I'm not certainly particularly well served. I mean, if you think about the named female characters in the book that you've got Johnny's mother, the woman in the institution who possibly tried to kill him when he was a child. You've got Karen, who is probably the most well-served woman in it. However, in a lot of the interpretive text, she is very badly maligned and as an adulterer and not much else. And from Johnny's perspective, there is a whole swathe of disposable women, including one awful one-night stand with a woman who murders a puppy for her own daft reasons. You've got the woman who cheats on her own boyfriend and then gets the boyfriend to beat the shit out of him. And then you've got the stripper that he has on a pedestal. And that's kind of the named characters, female characters in the book, and not much else. They're not great.
No, not at all. And Karen, I was really surprised when we got toward the end and she went back to the house to rescue or find Davidson based on the way she'd been written before that. So I felt like she had some, redemption toward the end.
Yeah.
But for the rest of the women, they were very just poorly constructed.
They aren't great.
No.
The female characters in this, not great at all. If you want to go back to the Labyrinth side of things, I suppose Karen is probably the Ariadne of the story then, really, isn't she?
Yes, saving Theseus. Yeah.
But yeah, I thought the female characters were poorly served. I thought Karen was the closest one to having anyone, but I kind of agree that there's a point on there that not many of the characters did come across well, with possibly the exception of Tom, the brother. Everyone else was kind of awful.
Yeah, let me
see. Davidson was a bit self-centered, all right. I don't remember that, but there's so much. It's so dense that it's entirely possible that that one passed me by.
Yeah, I know at the beginning too, when Johnny he's talking about Zampano, and he said something like, he didn't know if Zampano was his real name, and he said maybe it was a nom de plume, which means like a pen name, of course. But then he said maybe it was a nom de guerre, and I may be saying that wrong because I was like, what is the hell is a nom
There is
de
French for
guerre?
war, so yeah.
Yeah, so that I looked it up, and it was like supposed to be for like a person who's engaging in some type of combat or something. So it was, that military terminology I know at the beginning. So it probably was in there somewhere at the end too.
Yeah, possibly.
Yeah. Yeah. Because he is like, profiting off that picture. If he really even did that, because like Mark mentioned, that was an actual picture.
Yeah.
And a person who did take his own life. So yeah, there's so much like we could
This is littered with rabbit holes. This one. No, I agree with you, Chris. Yeah, no one does.
yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that was the
Yeah,
interesting thing too about Karen, how she would seem to be. This is also like, I think, an example of that misogynistic writing of women, because she would be seen as independent in some ways, and kind of cold. It mentioned her being cold towards Davidson, but then very dependent on him too.
yeah, and if honestly, I would say the reason it sort of peaks at about a 4 star for me is I found that sort of ending with Karen going back to the house and rescuing Nevinson and then coming back out. That felt a little bit neat for me, and it compared to the rest of the book, which was so ambiguous, that just felt like oh, and then they all lived happily ever after. I was like, in this book, are you
Yeah.
serious?
Yeah. That kind of goes into one of the other things that I want to talk about, as far as,
Don't apologize, Chris. It's great. Thank you.
exactly. Yeah. So a question, is House of Leaves a gothic novel? Is it a horror story, or is it a love story, or is it all of these?
I'd argue about it being a love story. I think there's elements of love story in there between both Johnny and Thumper, and also between Navidson and Karen. I think there's elements of it, but to call it a love story, I think, yeah, I mean, like, if you take that ending into consideration, maybe you could argue that it is. But again, that ending is probably the most out of place part of the book to me, one of the most out of place parts to it. Is it a gothic? Um, I think it shares a lot with a lot of gothic fiction. Weirdly, it's kind of weird that a lot of gothic fiction kind of tends to centralize on these isolated locations, and what he did really, really well was take a suburban house and put an isolated location right in the middle of it, which, so I think there was elements of that. I think it probably is closer to something more like Lovecraftian cosmic horror, if I'm honest. If you're gonna start splitting hairs around which genre of horror those bits fall into, I feel it fits closer to something like Lovecraft than it possibly does to more gothic things.
Yeah, I think there's like arguments for all of them, because I know, like, I don't really read romance, but one thing I hear is that for a book to be a true, like, not, I don't guess like gothic romance, but like romance, people go in expecting happy endings where the couple ends up together.
Which they
So
get in this.
yeah, so I'm like, okay, I can see you could call it a love story or a romance. One element too of the gothic is that the gothic is about the past coming back to haunt the present. So we definitely see that here. We've got people's past experiences that they're bringing with them into this house. People like Zampano looking at that documentary from a past event, and it's affecting and haunting him. Then Johnny is being affected and haunted by what he reads, and also by his own past, with his mother, and then his foster father was apparently abusive.
He was military, I think, actually.
Yeah,
Now
yeah, he was.
that's a militarist, the military character, actually.
So
Interesting.
yeah.
Yeah.
And then I think you said too, like the cosmic horror, definitely, because you've got something, something going on, something that can't be explained, possibly a monster, but we think maybe not an actual physical monster, but we don't know. Yeah, definitely psychological.
I think there was horror in it, though. I think I don't know if I don't think it neatly fits into the genre of horror, but I do think there's enough horror in it to sort of say, yeah, okay, there's enough horror elements there to at least have it count as horror adjacent, if not necessarily a straight horror.
Yeah, psychological, cosmic.
That sounds pretty close.
Yeah, and falling in the horror genre. Yeah, because you have, some of those elements of the uncanny. That's another thing I want to talk about. This idea of the uncanny that Freud had, where something is familiar but not quite familiar. There's something off about it. And that plays a lot into what happens, because the house would look like on the outside that it should be this perfect suburban setting, that it should be that place of comfort and home. But when you get inside of it, you find that it becomes unfamiliar and terrifying, because, it was baffling to me how they were talking about it, that labyrinth that would extend down to miles and miles. And I was like, okay. And then it was constricting. So that made me wonder, how is this real, or how is this happening? But then it also talked about other people, like you were talking about, having gone in there and then disappeared, and bodies that they didn't find, and like Holloway's, they never found his body.
To me, when it was talking, when it was the house was sort of, when the labyrinth part of the house was reacting to them, that to me felt very much rat in a lab. It felt like there was an external presence that was saying, what if I do this to him now? How is he going to react to that? That's kind of how that bit felt to me.
Yeah. And I know something else it did was like a lot of, like, from the postmodern genre, it had like metafiction, where you had this commentary on, it kind of knew what it was in some ways, but then it was also calling back to other previous works of literature, like Dante's Inferno, for one thing. They mentioned, about Zampano quoted something from Dante, but the interesting thing too with Dante's Inferno is that, like, I think it's the ninth circle of hell is ice, and everyone there, is there for some sort of deception and treachery. And you notice, like, the house, when they get to that space of, that's changing and deeper in that labyrinth, they're always talking about how cold it is. So I thought that was interesting too, to think about, how, this is a reflection of, hell, in the fact that you're going into that space, you're cold, it's dark, and you are kind of getting lost there, losing your mind. And then Johnny would talk about too, when he was reading, or, talking about certain parts of the manuscript where the people were going down into that space, and he would start talking about, it's dark, it's cold, I'm cold. So that was just something interesting to me.
It's interesting. It's been a long time since I read Dante, so I can't remember. But yeah, I hadn't made that connection. That's quite. That's an interesting one. All right.
Yeah, let's see. Yeah, Davidson with frostbite. Yeah, when he comes out. So that's what it made me think about. And then especially if we think about that circle being the, circle for people who are like treacherous, or have done, something kind of a betrayal of sorts. I was like, But then sometimes I also thought, like, it's all very interesting and I liked it. But then I did sometimes think, okay, is Mark, Z. Danielewski just throwing this in here to be like, look what I know. Look what I know.
I'm going to be honest. I think there was an awful lot of that. And I think there's an awful lot of red herrings just thrown in just for from the perspective of, this will drive them nuts if I put this little thing in here, after they've gone down the rabbit hole of researching all of these other different things. And, this is a thing that it almost felt like there's a few practical jokes in there just on the reader, just to sort of say, let's see how we react to this one.
Exactly. I'm trying to, just one little simple question. Well, it's not really simple.
Is there a simple question about this book? I'm waiting with bated breath for this one.
Why is the word house always written in blue? Do you think it's no reason whatsoever? Or do you think
don't know. I've been trying to figure that out. Now, in my copy in the UK version of it, it's not actually in a different color, but it is offset in the type. I'm going to see if I can find an example of it on here. But what it does is it offsets it, and sometimes it's offset only very, very slightly, and sometimes it's almost on a separate line. And I don't know. I couldn't figure it out.
That's neat, though. I didn't realize that it was different like the UK. I thought it would just be like blue everywhere. Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, no, this is entirely black and white. So even the pictures at the end, I don't know if any of those are in color in the US version, but they're
they are, because I noticed one thing. Yeah, this one's called like the full color edition. So let me see if I can get this pulled up then. Yeah, like here's some. That's a good.
Oh yeah, no, that's all in black and white, and it's a hell of a lot more difficult to see, I would say.
Oh wow. See, that's interesting. Like I was gonna think maybe, as far as the house, always being written in blue, I think now, because of what you just told me, that it's just to make that word stand out.
I think so. What's interesting though is that even if house is in the middle of a word, it still offsets it. I think there's somebody's surname called Houseman or something like that. I can't remember what it is. There's one where house is actually in the middle of the word. The letters HOUSE, and then those letters are still offset.
Like I can easily see, like from the way you're talking about the UK edition where it's offset, that it's kind of maybe showing how it's changing all the time, how it's not going to be in one simple format because it keeps expanding or, collapsing on itself on the inside.
Yeah, possibly. I'm just trying to find an example of the word house. It's dotted all around the book, and just when I'm asked to look for it, I can't see it anywhere. It's typical, isn't it?
Yeah, but I was thinking maybe with the blue word, like written in blue, I was like, is this supposed to be like blue is supposed to be a calming color? Yeah. Okay.
You see? So that's an example of one where it's very, very slightly offset, but in some of them it's almost on a separate line.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the reader set that's
I think you're right, Chris. Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah.
Especially because it's different in different books. So let's see.
Again, I think it's Danielewski just being obsessive and with his practical jokes on us.
Yeah, make us question it. Yeah. Yeah, like so many other things, right? Let's see, we are closing in on an hour, and there are like this outline. I knew we wouldn't get to everything because I have like 3 pages. So let me see. Is there anything else specific you want to add?
Anything specific I want to add to it? I can't think of anything off the top of my head around. A lot of the main points. I think the interesting things is to do with sort of reality versus perception of reality, and then how the different characters are. Those are the big ones that I wanted to talk about already. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I do agree with that, Chris. And again, that's probably part of why I gave it a 4-star, because actually, on a surface level, the story itself is relatively simple. And I think if it hadn't been formatted the way it was, I don't think it would have got the level of notoriety that it does. It's not a complex story told in this complex way. It's actually quite a very simple story. You know, there's in the actual story itself, there's relatively little originality. I mean, like what you're reading in there could almost be traced back to what, you know, Amityville or something like that, you know, where you're just, you know, it's just that the family moves in and the house is weird. You know, that's what it is on the surface. There isn't anything hugely original beyond that. So I don't think you're wrong about that, Chris, at all.
Yeah. Yep. Let's see.
Yeah. I agree with that.
No, you didn't miss it. No, we don't understand anything. We're probably just as full of you know what, as the rest of the people in the.
I could see myself reading this at another time and it annoying the living daylights out of me, and you know, and I can absolutely understand how you'd read through it and think, why is that it? I can also understand total infuriation with it, and I can also understand total obsession with it as well. It's one of those books where I can see all those points. Sometimes I read a book and people love it and it's like, I don't get why people love that book. This one, I don't love it. I really like it. I don't love it, but I get why people do, and I get why people obsess over it.
I think it found me at the right time this time, because this was my 4th attempt at reading it.
Oh, okay.
And I was like, I'm going to get through this damn book. I'm going to get through it before 2024 is over. It's going to happen. So that's why I'm putting myself out there. I was like, let's do a read along. I'm going to get through it this time. And reading it in November was a good distraction for me. I won't say a lot here on YouTube. Well, I do say a lot sometimes, but I live in the United States, and November was
bit of a rough one.
It was November. So yeah, with you know, around about November 5th or 6th, I really threw myself deeply into House of Leaves and found it very nice just to dive into something.
If you are able to devote the time and the energy to it, it is something that is great at taking all of your attention. So yeah, I could see that. No, this was my first attempt at reading it. I got it for it's something I've been thinking about for a while. I got it for a birthday present this year back in the summer from my wife, and then I let it sit on the shelf for several months, and I was like, this looks quite intimidating, and it's not as intimidating as I thought it would be. If in all honesty, you know, it is a lot more accessible. It's a book I wouldn't recommend to anyone. I would say, if what we're saying sounds intriguing, then read it and have your own experience with it. You know, sometimes I read a book and it's fun, and I, you know, even if it's only good, I'll say, oh, this is a good book, you should read this. I don't think I'd say you should read this to anyone.
No, I would be like, if you like XYZ, and then jump into it. Let's see. That leads us. We're going to talk in just a minute too about some books that are read-alikes. And I was going to mention We Used to Live Here. I read that earlier this year, and it does have some similarities, but it's not as much of an undertaking.
I haven't read that one, so I'll have to check. I'll have to check that one out.
Weird books, November was a good time to get lost. Yeah, I feel like around January 20th or so, I'm gonna want to get lost in a house somewhere outside of the United States. I'm coming to see you, Mark. I'm coming to see you. Yeah, I'm so glad I got through it too.
And Jen, I probably wouldn't have picked it up this time if you hadn't put up and saying, right, I'm doing it in November. And I was like, I saw your post and I thought, okay, time to crack the spine on this and give it a go.
Exactly. Yeah, need to get lost for 4. Yeah. And I'm afraid that even after that, then, who's to say? I could talk about that forever, but I digress. Y'all are going to hear a lot over the next 4+ years. You can hear a little more about it on my American Rapture vlog that I did, because timely. Yeah, give it another try. Hey, fourth time's the charm.
I will say one thing: it's one of the most fun books to discuss. Then
It is.
It's because there is so much interpretation around it.
And I feel like we barely scratched the surface today.
And you get to be one of these insufferable people who just say, "Oh well, I read House of Leaves."
I know. I keep seeing like these like jokes talking about how all these like white frat boys are like, "Oh, my favorite novel is House of Leaves. Do you read?" And I'm like, "Stop it."
I would question anyone who says that this is their favorite book.
Yeah. It's not. No, it's not a favorite. It's an experience, and I did give it 5 stars for that. But yeah. Yeah, I think it does too. If you can make it through the first 100, 150-ish pages, and then you kind of start to find your flow in it a little bit.
The one thing I would say, one of my recommendations for reading it, if you are reading it for the very first time, is it's very easy to really try and make sure that you're understanding absolutely everything that's going on. It's sometimes for this, it's probably better if you can just almost take a mental step back and then just let it kind of wash over you and just accept the fact that there's stuff that you're not quite getting in it. And you'll enjoy the experience more if you don't, if certainly on a first reading, you don't try to hit every single and try to understand every single reference.
Yeah. And some of that, like you mentioned, I did skip over, like the footnotes that were just for journals or articles, and that was it. They were just like citing your works in a essay or something. I was like, no, I don't need to look at that.
Yeah, and what was interesting about that as well, and again, this is down to the unreliable narrator, is that some of those were real books and some of them were just completely made up.
Exactly. Because I know some people try to go find all that stuff, and I'm like, no, you don't need to do that.
Oh yeah, you can make this book your personality if that's what you really want to do.
Yes.
Oh yeah, the echo stuff's a lot of crap. But like I said, that's just to show off that Zampano's full of shit. That's the entire purpose of that whole chapter.
Exactly. So let's see. Anything else that we want to mention?
Well, let's have a think. Yeah, I think we've hit all the notes of things that I wanted to chat about with this. I'd be interested to hear what other things are quite like this. You said that We've Always Lived Here is a similar sort of experience.
Yeah, we used to live here. Marcus Cleaver, I think, is the author of that one.
Okay.
We used to live here. That's the only read-alike I could think of. So if any of you have other read-alikes, that would be great. I have a few movies that would kind of be watch-alikes. One of them is The Night House, and that's about a woman whose husband has died. He took his own life, and she's living in this house out kind of in this isolated area by this lake, and it starts to change, and her perception of what happened with her husband starts to change, and her husband may or may not be haunting her. It may be another presence there, and that's an interesting one. Yeah, the Amityville Horror. Now, I have seen the original movie and that remake with Ryan Reynolds. I have the book, but I've never read the book. But I can see, like, because it is about a family in a house that should be a perfect place for them and ends up totally not being.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was probably about 13 when I read it. So, we're talking many years ago. But the couple of things that kind of made me think about Amityville Horror was the family that arrive in what seems to be this idyllic house, and then sort of end up having to flee from it because it's kind of tries to kill them. I think the family unit is quite similar as well. I think it's a husband and wife and a young girl and a young boy. But the other thing about it as well is that the book, if memory serves, I'm not 100% certain on this, but the book was kind of written as if it was documenting a true thing that happened to this family, and it was like that this is the thing that happened to this family, and certainly the Navidson part of it. Now in that it's not kind of the weird multi-dimensional side to the house that's like that. It's more of a standard haunted house. But it's quite an effective and creepy haunted house, if I remember it correctly. It's been over 30 years since I read it.
Yeah, bullshitting. Yeah, because the Lutz family, they embellished quite a bit about what actually happened in the house. But no, there was an actual murder in the house before they moved in, the DeFeo family. Let's see, September House. I've heard good things and bad things about that. What did you think of it, Christine? Did you like it? A couple of other movies, while if Christine is letting us know what she thought of the September House. As Above, So Below. It's about a group that goes into the catacombs.
The catacombs of Paris, isn't it?
Yeah, and it kind of goes along too with like reference to Dante's Inferno as well, like going down into the catacombs, and what they see may not really be happening. It may be things from the past. Vivarium is a movie also where you have a couple who moves into this perfect looking house in a neighborhood, but then all of the houses start looking exactly the same, and they find themselves completely alone and isolated, and all these bizarre things, keep happening to them. So that one's similar also. Session 9 is another movie where you have a crew that's going in. I think they're cleaning asbestos out of an abandoned mental institution, and there starts to be like hauntings coming back from the past. They start experiencing psychosis, and some terrible things go down.
Oh, I'll definitely check those out.
Let's see, documentary. Yeah, I don't know if I'll pick it up or not because I've heard so many different things. Another movie too, and this just kind of goes along with found footage, but one of my favorite found footage movies, which I just try to throw in anytime I can, is the Blair Witch Project. I'm sure most of the people have watched that, but just again, the idea that they keep going in that circle, right? They can't escape the woods, and they also have, just questions about what's real, what's in their minds, who is this Blair Witch? Because we never see her either.
No, you don't.
So just, something else if you like that kind of questioning of reality.
One of the things about Blair Witch is it was very much it was kind of it's one of those films where I kind of say to people, you almost had to be there at the time, because people will sort of watch it now and they kind of go, is this it? It's like, yeah, but you kind of had to have been there when this came out, and there was the marketing around that, the way it was done online, and they just put so much effort into portraying this as a real documentary, which it wasn't, and the effort that they went into that, and a lot of people genuinely believed it was real.
Yeah,
that was one
because
of the cool
the internet
was
so new for us in 99. Like, see, I was 24 in 1999, so it was like, you had that marketing, like you said, where it was, we were all led to believe that these young students actually went into the
Nice. They were
woods,
gone. Yeah.
and disappeared, and now they're gone. And we couldn't really look it up on the internet to make sure it was true or not. So yeah, it was very interesting.
Could have been.
Yeah.
Could have been.
Okay, yeah, you thought it was real footage too. See, that also kind of lends itself to the idea of perception and reality, like we see with House of Leaves. The question of, is there really a witch? Did this really happen?
I did. God, yeah, I'm showing my age now, but I absolutely did.
I did not see it in the theater, but I saw it on. I suppose at that time that would have still been. Was that
I would
VHS
have been
still?
VCR at that point. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
We're still pre-DVD days.
yeah. Dumb teenager. Listen. 13. Okay, young
Yeah, all right,
people.
rub it in. Thanks.
I'm old. I'll be 50 next year, so all is good. All's fine. It's all good. Okay, yeah, okay. And Russell was 24. Let's see. Yeah. Yeah, see, some people do watch the Blair Witch now and they're like, that I don't get it, but I still find it scary. I think it's great.
I know
I
it's
like that
fantastic.
they didn't show the monster.
Well, I just thought that was a masterclass in we have no money, but can we do something effective with it? And
Exactly.
it's found footage wasn't new, but it was one of the earliest, one of the best examples of using found footage as
Mm-hmm.
as the trope. And it was I don't think it ever really scared me. But I do remember thinking this is good filmmaking considering what they've got to work with here. This is very, very good filmmaking.
Scare the crap. Yeah, see, I think like one of the things like I mentioned is they didn't show the witch, so it
Mm.
left you to kind of question and wonder. Much like House of Leaves, right, has left us to question and wonder who's the monster, what's the monster, is there, you know, more than one person writing this? Is this all, just by whatever that word is of people, coming together? Who knows, right?
I think it is. This is a really fun one because there's so many. A lot of stories will give you definitive answers, and there's not much room for interpretation in a lot of them. You've been spoon fed the entire thing, and a lot of people prefer that. A lot of people get very frustrated. I'd actually say most people get frustrated if they don't have closure or a definitive answer as to what it is. And I kind of like when I'm reading something and to not get a definitive answer. I kind of like watching things like David Lynch films and thinking, wow, this is cool. I have no idea what's going on, but it's cool.
Yes, yes. I feel like if an author or a filmmaker kind of earns that ambiguous ending, then I'm all for it. Okay, here's the thing, right? I deciphered the secret code. I spent like, I don't know, an hour, 2 hours, something, figuring out what it all was. And then I commented on our Discord, and Mark was like, I Googled it. And I was like, what did I think of that?
30 seconds on Google. It was like, yeah, I don't have the patience. I started to spell it out and I thought, I don't have the patience for this. And I Googled it. Someone on Reddit had done it for me.
And I was like, why didn't I think to look it up? Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Yeah, the
No,
code.
I took the cheats way out. I Googled it.
That is,
Yes, I am.
Mark is a cheater.
Totally.
No, that's smart. That was an effective use of resources that I should have thought of. I did. And I was like,
Google was my friend. And that was like, I just thought, oh, this is time I'm not going to get back. I went about a paragraph down.
Yeah, her letters were really sad, and there were a couple of just quotes I hadn't thought about mentioning the quotes yet, but let me see if I can find these in this multi-layered tab of ridiculousness in here.
I agree. I actually thought the letters was it was actually one of the most effective parts of the book.
Yeah, and the
And
poems they were supposed to be written by Zampano, I guess.
yeah, I think so.
This one, like, it was on page 563 in my book, but it's like appendix B, I think, or appendix something. Let me see. I think it's B. No, I'm
Yeah,
sorry, it's F. Appendix F, the poem. Little solace comes to those who grieve when thoughts keep drifting as walls keep shifting, and this great blue world of ours seems a house of leaves, moments before the wind. So that made me think about this book as like an experience in grief and loss. Johnny for his mother, Johnny's mother for Johnny, Karen for, Will when he was lost. And I really liked that poem.
it's pretty lovely actually. I mean,
Yeah.
Danielewski is very good at constructing doing the whole deconstruction of the novel type thing. But when he's for most of the prose, it's kind of sparse. But when he does put his mind to it, he can put some beautiful stuff together.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that. And then there was another quote that just made me so like sad. Let me see. I did write that
That was
down.
the one in that was kind of from the Zampano. I remember you saying about this. This was the Zampano diary entries, wasn't it?
Yeah, like appendix B. No, I marked it somewhere. Let me see.
Because I remember that one as well.
Because I kept reading that out loud to my husband one day, and I was like, "This is the saddest thing I've ever read." Here it is, from Zampano. I took my morning walk. I took my evening walk. I ate something. I thought about something. I wrote something. I napped and dreamt something too. And with all that something, I still have nothing because so much of some things has always been and always will be you. I miss you.
Yeah. That was such a strange reference in the book because there was a sentence in there about it referencing something called Redwood or someone called Redwood, and it references back to this appendix, and this appendix ends up being diary entries from Zampano from I think about the 50s up to the present, and towards the end of all of those diary entries, he references that he saw a guy called Redwood who he doesn't think he saw him because if he did see him, he would have followed him or something like that. And it's that was one of the eeriest parts of the book, and that was one of the things I quite liked. It was like it's only there, it's nowhere else. It's really cryptic. It's also really quite eerie, and it was just those little throwaway things in that I thought elevated it.
Mm-hmm. And then the one line that we talked about too that was that Zampano writing. He was supposed to be writing about Holloway. Was it Holloway? And he was like, or was it Tom, Will's brother? When Zampano wrote something like, I would have written more about this, but I drank too much or something, and it should have been.
Yeah, I would have drank more, but then he would have drank. Tom would have continued drinking or something, but then I got tired and went to bed or something like that.
Yeah,
I can't remember the exact quote, but it was something along those lines. And I think that was a little bit of letting the mask slip a little bit of either. So there's kind of two ways to look at it. Either Zampano is letting the mask slip and this is all him and he's making it all up. Or if you wanted to go really obtuse with this, you could say that Nabbitson made it out of the house, so perhaps Tom did as well, and maybe Tom is Zampano.
Oh, that's a good theory.
That was the one I was thinking. But
I hadn't thought about that, and maybe that's why Zampano is blind, because maybe something happened while Tom slash Zampano was lost in the labyrinth all that
Yeah,
time.
you don't find out whether Zampano was. It's implied that Zampano went blind later in life, but it's never actually said, because there's things about his past where he talks about things that he'd seen. So the implication is that he had gone blind, but it doesn't say how or why or when.
Ooh, see, now look, we just opened up a whole can of worms.
This is why it's so much fun. Oh yeah, there are.
Yeah.
There's bits of Morse code sort of dotted into things when they're talking about Morse code and stuff. Yeah.
And they do that in the book We Used to Live Here also. There's some Morse code in there. Let's see. Tom was disabled from a war.
I thought that was the other character. I thought that was the architect guy that they brought in first, that Tom brought in, the guy who was in the wheelchair.
Yeah, Bill Reston. Let me check, because I do have something here with like the character analysis. Let's see. No, Tom's a house builder, and we know he enjoys smoking pot and drinking alcohol. I think it is Bill Reston. That's the.
Yeah, he's in a wheelchair, I think.
Yeah. No, why can I not find his character? I know he's important. Here he is. Well, it doesn't say in my little notes that that's how, but he is the one who does use a wheelchair. Let's see.
Yeah, the two guys who come along with Holloway, they're a bit interchangeable. I got to be honest with you.
Yeah, Jed and Wax, I think. But one of them, I think it's Wax. Isn't he the one who kisses Karen?
Yeah.
And they get it on film. Yeah.
But other than that, they're fairly interchangeable.
Mm-hmm. Anything else? I know I keep being like, anything else? Then we're like, oh, yeah.
Do you know something? This is one of these things that you could just end up talking about for people. I would imagine people have probably written doctoral theses on this book. I wouldn't surprise me.
They have. There is a podcast that I listen to, the Talking Scared podcast with Neil McRobert. And he's got a PhD, and he wrote his dissertation on, I think it was something along the lines of the, Gothic over the years, how it's been depicted. And one chapter of his dissertation was on House of Leaves. And I'm sure there are multiple, like you said, other, theses and dissertations on this book, because you could just go off on so many, unique takes on it.
And people have very strong opinions online about it as well.
Yes.
You start to look into it and you go like, "Ooh, that's a can of worms. I'm gonna close back up again. Thank you very much."
Right. Yeah. Okay. Well, we are almost at an hour and a half. I think we did pretty well keeping it in this hour and a half frame. I feel like I rambled on some. I'm going to blame that on my nerves. And I'm going to blame it on my nerves.
Well, I'm going to blame it on my nerdiness.
That too. It's nerves and nerdiness.
And Chris, no, we didn't give you any answers. Sorry. That was never on the cards.
Probably more questions than anything.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm so glad
that. Thank you, Jen, as well. Yeah, me too. Because if you hadn't put out the call for this, I don't think I would have. I think it had been sitting on my shelf for quite a lot longer again.
Well, thank you for joining me, and everyone who read it or reread it. Thank you so much. Thank you for coming today. If you are catching us on the replay, thank you. Feel free to leave comments about what you thought, and we can just keep diving into rabbit holes and going down labyrinths for the rest of our lives. This might be a good thing for us to do over the next 4 or so years to keep occupied. So if I start spouting off random House of Leaves theories, then you know what's happening.
I'll be there to hear it.
Thank you, everybody. Y'all have a
Thanks, everyone.
wonderful rest of your day or night, and happy holidays if you celebrate. If not, happy winter. If you're on the other side of the world, Cliff, happy summer to you. Bye.
Take care, everyone. And thanks, Jen.
Thank you. We did it.